My name is Darren Coble. I am principal and founder of Versa Business Partners. We're a small coaching, executive coaching, leadership coaching, and human resources consulting firm. We saw a need in the market to just try and help the local small business owners connect with experts in the area, and so worked with the Bryan College Station Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Development Center, and Employer Flexible to get this webinar series kicked off. We appreciate you coming to the first one. Today we've got Charlie Scroggins from Scroggins CPAs, and he's going to provide some insight and expertise around the CARES Act as we know it as of today. And then Jim Pillans has joined us as well from the SBDC in Bryan, Texas. And he's going to provide some information, a short introduction to kind of what happens when something like the CARES Act gets passed, what the disaster relief loans look like, and then we'll kind of give an insight of kind of where we are today. Just a quick heads up, I want folks to get comfortable, and I hate to say this, but we're going to have to be a little comfortable with the answer, I don't know. We're seeing things change even after the CARES Act has come out as the Small Business Association starts to look at things. And so it's a pretty fluid time right now. And, you know, I think Greg Phelps has a question, when will the terms and forms be finalized? I mean, that's kind of a sign there that they're still working on some of this stuff. And so the banks are just, I think, now starting to get some information that Jim will tell us. And so right now, again, Jim Pillans is the director of the Brazos Valley SBDC, and then Charlie Scroggins is the president of Scroggins CPA out of Houston, Texas, and Frisco, Texas area, Dallas area. So, welcome, gentlemen. I really appreciate you joining us and being open to be the first volunteer to take this webinar series on and introduce us into this process. And so I'm going to hand it over to the two of you. I'll watch as the questions come in, and if we have anything coming, I will I'll poke in and ask questions as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Pillans, and I'm the director of the Brazos Valley Small Business Development Center. And before I get started with that, I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. We're a national program. There's about 1,000 of us scattered throughout the country. And we all do basically the same things. We offer low-cost business training, but the main thing that we do is we offer a free confidential consulting service. We never charge for what we do, and whatever our clients tell us and give us is held in strict confidence, and we never recommend that you purchase anything we benefit from. The reason why I'm bringing that up is that just like any big program that's going to go out there nationally, there'll be some companies that come out with possibly some help features that may charge you. Some of them are legitimate because they can charge to help you. Some of them may not be. So just be on the lookout for that. But there's 1,000 SBDCs in the country. We're here to try to help you succeed. We're funded in part by the SBA, but we are not SBA employees. So as we go through this presentation, I'm not representing the SBA in any manner, but I have basic information that they have provided that I'm going to try to generate. And I think before we get started, we ought to really think about, sometimes we wonder how long it takes for information to get through Congress out into the field. But if you really stop and think about this, the president signed this order in place on the 27th. And the SBA had 15 days to get it out, according to Congress, for people to start looking at it. And they were able to provide that information to start with very quickly, especially for a government agency, and got information out ready to go in some part by Monday. I will tell you that typically whenever Congress comes up with various different rules and regulations, sometimes there has to be some adjustments in that to be able to get it for it to get worked on at the field. And I think that's where we are currently with the CARES Act. I just got a memo from NAGLE saying that NAGLE is the organization in Houston for the preferred lenders group for government loans. And they believe that some new documentation will be sent to the banks by this afternoon. But again, the banks have got to take that information, make it where it works for their operation, because they're not only being looked at by the SBA, but they also have government regulators that review them, and they have certain limitations that they can do as well. And so I thought I'd bring that up just to start, and as has already been mentioned, so far this has kind of been a moving target. There was some information put out before the CARES Act was signed, and so a few things have changed. There probably will be some adjustments as we go through. So everyone needs money and needs it as quick as we can. Just be a little bit patient, but this is really coming pretty quickly as we go. And I'm going to talk about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program called EDL, and I may refer to it as that or simply as the disaster loan. But this disaster loan has been in existence for a very long time. Every time that there's a hurricane, a tornado, or a flood, and there is a disaster declaration claimed and certified, then these same disaster loans have been available. Typically, you see them for physical damage, with a small part of it being economic damage. Obviously, the coronavirus is all economic damage, and so that's what this program is about. Typically in a disaster, then maybe it's along the Gulf Coast, and you have a few states along the Gulf Coast that have suffered the disaster. And so people go on the SBA website to apply for the disaster loan. And even though there may be some delays, the system can handle it. There are 30 million small businesses in the US. Every business, unless you're selling groceries or toilet paper, every business has been affected by this. So you can imagine what happened when such a large number of people started applying for disaster loans. Some of my clients that got through the first week told me that it took over 4 hours for them to be able to upload the documents. SBA closed that method of taking the applications, went to another one. It was an improved process, but still the website kept crashing. Starting this Monday, so this is the third change on it. It's now a pretty streamlined process of a couple of pages, and I haven't heard anyone stating that they've had declines as far as being kicked off or delays. So if you're able to go through this, the document is so streamlined now, you should be able to get through within 15 or 20 minutes. If as you fill out the documentation, if they want more information from you, they will contact you to upload that information at a later time instead of doing this all at one time. Let me cover some of the details of the loan package. The loan can go up to $2 million, and there's no payments for 12 months. Interest rate is at 3.75% for small businesses, and some private nonprofits are also eligible. Their interest rate is 2.75. The terms of the loan are 30-year terms. It's virtually for what the SBA classifies as all small businesses. So typically, if you have a business that's less than 500 employees, you will probably be eligible. The money can be used for payroll, accounts payable, and other bills. So basically, it's a working capital loan that you can use it for any purpose that you want to. And in years past, they've taken a look at credit score, your ability to be able to pay back the loan, and also your financial situation, stating that if you should be able to go to a bank to get a loan, you may not qualify. So you need to know that not everyone that applies for this loan will qualify for the loan, but you won't know that until you go through the system. Something that they added recently, this week as a matter of fact, If you go to the website and you apply for the disaster loan, you can receive a grant up to $10,000, whether you are approved for the loan or not. Originally, the information came out stating that you would get a $10,000 grant, but it's been changed to state that you can get up to $10,000. And again, this is a grant, not a loan. You won't ever have to pay it back. And you should receive this amount within 3 days. If you go through the disaster loan and process it, they're saying it takes somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks for you to be able to retain your funds in that area. It doesn't cost anything to apply. You don't have to take all of the money in case you are approved. You can take part of it. If you are denied for some reason, you can come back and reapply. But if you are approved for a certain amount of money, my suggestion would be that you not decline the loan, that you just keep it there. So in case something comes up where you need more money than what you thought, you can come back and pick up the loan that's approved for you. If you deny it, then you've got to start the process all over again. So like I said, it's a pretty easy process now. And if you apply for some of the other programs that are out there, such as the payroll protection plan, which Charlie will talk about later, it does not exclude you from getting the disaster loan, and the disaster loan does not exclude you from receiving the PPP loan program. So what's the risk in applying? It doesn't cost anything. You can turn down all or part of it. And yet, if you need the money, it will be available to you at 3.75% for 30 years. So my suggestion would be to apply for it. You receive a grant when you submit the information that you'll never have to pay back. And then take a look at the other programs that are available out there and utilize all of them. So you want to take advantage of every program that you have. And the problem is, if you only apply for the disaster loan, it may be 4 weeks to 6 weeks before you find out if you qualify or not. So I'm advising my clients to apply for both loans at the same time. And I think that's it for me for the disaster loan program.
Yeah, and thank you, Jim. That was really helpful to understand. I wasn't aware that the grant was eligible just upon application. And also, just to clarify, you had mentioned that there were no payments due for the first 12 months of the loan?
That's correct.
Okay. Very, very cool. And so for the EIDL, the EIDL loan, is that where exactly do we go? Would a small business owner go to apply?
So you can, the easiest way is probably just Google SBA disaster loans, but you'll end up at the COVID-19 relief.sba.gov website. And let me also state that our district office in Houston has done a superb job of getting information out on the information not only about the disaster loan, but also the CARES Act. And they have 4 webinars a day, 4 in English, 3 in Spanish, to try to help explain the programs and what these programs could do. So once again, you can Google SBA Houston District Office, or their website is www.sba.gov/offices/district/Texas/Houston. Again, or Google Houston SBA. A lot of good information, as well as a PowerPoint slide presentation, but the webinars they have are really good. They've been doing these now for 3 weeks with all of those involved, and they're 300 people a session.
Very good. how about one question came in, and actually I think before taking that one, so folks, as we move into the CARES Act, this is where we'll start talking about the payroll protection program and the different program. And so we'll do our best to keep clarity between the emergency, between the EIDL as well as the payroll protection program, because these programs can get pretty confusing as we start moving into the CARES Act. And so as we talk about it, we've got one question already that if I do the EIDL and I take an EIDL loan, how does that impact the PPP? Am I able to do both programs and those kinds of things? And so as our Charlie, as you get going here on the CARES Act that includes the payroll protection program, if you can just make sure you touch on that for us.
And I can circle back with that too if you need it. Great.
Thank you, Jim. And Jim, we'll come back to you in a few minutes once we get through it and start really getting into this this conversation. Charlie, welcome.
All right. So quickly, I have I posted a link to the EDL disaster loan application from that Jim was talking about. I don't have the Houston SBA link that I saw Barbara was asking about, but
I'm pulling that one up as well. And folks, what we will do after this call, if you have any concerns about this, please email the covid@versabp.com and let us know that you don't want to receive anything, but we will send a note out to the folks that registered and participated with these certain links and kind of this critical information for you as well.
And thank you, Jim, for that information on the EDL loans. It's the existing loans and things that are already out there are one of the more difficult things to navigate, because there's a lot of interaction between the PPP and the EDL loans and different SBA loans that most people didn't know existed, because most people didn't need to apply for them, unless they've gone through an emergency, some sort of disaster. Obviously, Houston is one of those areas, but there are a lot of clients. We have a lot of clients that have never had to engage with the SBA or deal with any emergency loans. So this is new for a lot of people. I've seen a question a couple of times already about the interaction between the EDL and the PPP. So if you, for example, apply for that EDL loan and you get the grant, the $10,000 grant, that will come out of the balance that you are able to receive forgiven out of the PPP loan. So any amount that you end up getting in that grant just comes out of the PPP loan, and then obviously if you end up with more cash than you need, because you've gotten both awarded to you, then you can just use that cash to pay back the extra unforgiven amount of the PPP loan. So let's see. Look at your other questions there. Yeah, the other one I saw from Bill, the application that you make to the SBA on their website for the EDL loans and whatnot is different from the payroll protection program. The payroll protection program is applied for through a participating bank, is my understanding. Jim, let me know if I'm incorrect, and if there are other ways to apply at this point, as of 1/21 this afternoon. But your prescribed method of applying is going through your bank. Now, different banks are saying they're going to have different application processes. By and large, they're going to request the same information, your payroll information, of course, rent and utilities, things like that. So the application process should be pretty similar from bank to bank, but everything for the payroll protection program is run through a bank, though it is an SBA program. All right. All right. So let
So,
me see. Let me pull up my. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Darren.
yeah, Charlie, I was just going to ask you if you could just provide some introduction to what the CARES Act is, what it covers overall, and kind of what we're going to talk about today. Because, folks, if you haven't pulled up the actual CARES Act, it's about 800 to 900 pages. And so it covers a lot of different topics. And what we're going to talk about is a handful of folks. So we're a handful of the different programs. And so that's what Charlie's going to talk to, mainly around the Payroll Protection Act and what's going to offer kind of immediate relief to some of the small businesses. And so Charlie, if you'll give kind of an overview of what the CARES Act looks like and kind of what we're talking to today.
Yeah. So the CARES Act aims kind of at two different segments. One is a personal segment, people that are just individuals, employees, whatnot. So there are a lot of segments of the bill that are aimed specifically at just individuals, families, that sort of thing. And then there are segments of the bill that are aimed obviously at small business with the payroll protection program and things like that. The bill is so large and encompassing that, you know, obviously we wouldn't have time to go over everything that it offers. But I can hit on kind of the highlights, the things that we're getting the most questions about. The way I have them, I did a write-up of the CARES Act on Monday and segmented it between personal and business. And that's really the best way I can imagine to approach it. The one obviously most important thing that we're getting a lot of questions about from our clients are the recovery rebates. The $1,200 payments that everybody is eagerly anticipating receiving from the government. I think I read today that those that receive Social Security don't need to file tax returns to receive the rebate. They will receive the payment automatically. However, they receive their check, whether it's a physical check or a direct deposit. So that's been the big hang-up is a lot of retirees don't file tax returns because they don't have anything other than Social Security income. So they will receive their check and receive it automatically. Several senators are asking for those people's payments to be sent first and most quickly for what it's worth. So these recovery rebates are not taxable income. You will never be taxed on it. They are sent out automatically based on your income level on the most recently filed return that the IRS has for you, being 2018, 2019. Obviously, a lot of people haven't filed their 2019 returns yet. And there are thresholds. So if you are filing single and you have income over $75,000, or if you're filing jointly with your spouse and your income is over $150,000 for 2019, then I may urge you to hold off on filing your return if your income was lower last year. The rebates are throttled a little bit. Once you get over that $75,000 or $150,000 threshold, those rebates are throttled. And by the time that single filers hit $99,000 of income and married filing jointly hit $198,000 of adjusted gross income, you lose the entire rebate, and so you won't expect anything. Beyond that, you don't need to file or request for the rebate check. It'll be sent out automatically. I think the last I read was, you know, they're still aiming for about 3 weeks from now. So we'll see how they do. But that is the biggest the biggest question that we get is where's my check? When do I get it? How do I get it? So you know, it's understandable. Let's see. Basically, those that qualify, in case it matters to you, you cannot be a non-resident alien or a dependent on someone else's tax return. It's essentially $1,200 per adult, $500 per child under 17. So if you have perhaps a child in college on your return and they didn't file their own return, then that person would not count towards the $500 per child. But you get $1,200 per person, per adult, and those are the basics. There's not a lot else to it, but I've seen a lot of misinformation about it being taxable income. It isn't, about you needing to apply and you don't, things like that. So another big item in the bill is retirement account distributions. If you are low on cash as an individual and you just need to pay the bills and you have money in retirement, ordinarily our advice as tax accountants, do not take money out of your retirement account if you can help it, particularly if you're under 59 and a half. If you're under 59 and a half, not only do you want to pay taxes on that income, but you also will have a 10% penalty on top of that, which is, that's no good. There are a handful of caveats, but that's generally what we're looking at. So in the CARES Act, they are waiving for any COVID-19 specific distributions. I'm not positive why you would tell them you're distributing money for any other reason, but for any COVID-19 distributions made this year, up to $100,000, they're waiving the 10% penalty altogether. So you'll never have that. And you have 3 years that we're going to spread that taxable income over. So if you pull out $60,000 just to bills, pay your mortgage, things like that, you'll pay taxes on $20,000 a year instead of having that giant $60,000 distribution run up your tax bracket there. So if you, beyond that, any amount that you pay back in a given year is considered a deemed rollover. So you can put the money back in your retirement account if all this blows over by next year. So that's another really, really big thing for a lot of our clients that are hurting for money a little bit. It's a lot safer now to pull out a little retirement money if you need to. Let's see here. For anybody who's subject to required minimum distributions, you have to take out of retirement accounts when you reach a certain age. Those are being waived for this year. So if you are subject to those or going to be subject to those, call your financial advisor of choice and make sure that those get turned off if you don't need that income coming in. Let's see. Try to skip some of these smaller ones. So the other big issue that we have is student loan relief. We have a lot of people that are paying on student loans. Any federally funded student loans now are automatically going into deferral, and the payments are being marked as paid, and you are accruing no interest. This doesn't apply to any obviously personal loans, private loans, things like that. But any federally funded student loans, it doesn't matter who holds them, who's servicing them. It's just the federally funded student loans are going to be in automatic deferral, so you won't be required to file for that deferral, and it won't be marked against your credit for non-payment. You're going to have payments shown as paid on time. So that's another really good thing. Beyond that, if you're lucky enough to have an employer who pays a little extra beyond your salary, like it pays for continuing education, things like that, up to $5,250 of payments from your employer would be considered non-taxable income to you, still a deduction for them, and can go towards your student loans instead of counting as salary. That used to only apply to students' tuition. If your employer was having you go back to school and they were paying your tuition, things like that. So now, at least for 2020, you can use that money to pay for student loans once they come out of deferral. So up to $5,250 per employee. Hayden, I saw that question come in. That's another big thing. So mortgage deferrals are generally available on similar to student loans. Mortgage payment deferrals are available for federally backed mortgages. So obviously your traditional Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae mortgages. There's a foreclosure moratorium as well. So any federally backed mortgage holder may not foreclose on anybody who's having payment troubles through or for 60 days through March 18th, 2020. I'm not. Let's see if we have any updates on the. All right. So all the federally backed mortgage holders, basically anyone who has one of these mortgages insured by the Federal Housing Administration, if it's under Section 255 of the National Housing Act, guaranteed under Section 184A or the Housing and Community Development Act, and any service members out there who have their mortgages guaranteed, insured, or made by the Department of Veteran Affairs, and same with our farmers out there, made by the Department of Agriculture. Any of those loans, you can call and request up to 12 months of deferral. Let's see. So yeah, definitely contact your mortgage holder, your mortgage lender, and see what options you have out there. If you are in one of those categories, that can definitely help out quite a few people, I think. Let's see. All right. Do we have are there any other questions about particular personal things before we hop into the some of the business stuff? I want to make sure we get plenty of material in today.
Sure. I think we're getting into some more questions around the idle, and then we can talk about that once we get through the other piece.
Yep. You want to hit the payroll protection program now?
Yes. Let's take 5 minutes on the payroll protection program, and then let's just go ahead and crack it open to questions, and we can start kind of getting back to the list of questions that we've got coming in, and I'll walk you both through these questions as they come in and as I've got them logged here.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to hit this up kind of in the order that I have it written down here.
And just to clarify, folks, this is the payroll protection program. Or the paycheck protection program. This is not the idle, and so it's not the disaster loan that we're talking about right now.
So this is essentially a loan that they are making excessively easy to have forgiven. It may be a little tricky to qualify for, and the calculations a little bit difficult, or can be a little bit difficult. But if you qualify, and obviously if you're given the loan, the idea behind the entire thing is you're going to use the funds to pay things like payroll, rent, mortgage interest for your business. So if you own properties or you own a building or something like that, it's the interest only, not principal. Rent, if you don't own and you rent your office space, which is the majority of us, and utilities. Utilities isn't exactly well defined, but you can imagine that they're going to be putting out a little bit of documentation on what qualifies as utilities. So this loan that you receive through the Paycheck Protection Program is meant to keep the doors open, the lights on, and the people in the office is the idea. So hence the rent and mortgage, the payroll and whatnot. So The maximum loan amount is going to be the lesser of these things. So we're going to start with $10 million. If you qualify for a $10 million loan, you probably have people on staff, and that probably doesn't. It's probably not any of us here. You probably have people doing your research for you. So it is 2.5 times or 250% of your average monthly payroll costs for the year leading up to the loan. Technically, the language in the act says that you can request this using payroll up to the day that you are granted the loan. It makes it, I feel, incredibly difficult to prove that you've paid any particular payroll, because you could apply today, issue a payroll today that will boost your payroll considerably. And I think that also providing federal payroll filings to prove up the payroll is going to be pretty difficult. But if you do not have payroll in terms of W-2, and that can be any kind of W-2 income, regular wages, paid time off, vacation, pretty much anything that's going to show up on a W-2, then you can use that to qualify. If you weren't in business last year, or you are seasonal, then you can use a slightly modified period of time than the most recent 12 months. Most everybody that I've talked to is going to use through the quarter ending March 31st, because you have 941 forms to prepare that will suffice as proof of your payroll and payroll tax payments. And that ends nicely on the end of the quarter there. So your March 31, 941, and the 3 prior to that, so that'll be quarters 2, 3, and 4 of 2019 would be what you'd need to use. Once you have your payroll time period handled with your bank, through your application, we need to kind of discuss what constitutes payroll. Obviously, the wages, the payroll taxes don't all count. The majority of your payroll taxes are not going to count. In Texas, we have Texas Workforce Commission unemployment payments. Those count, but only state and local. We don't have local taxes, so only state and local taxes count. So none of your FICA, Medicare, Social Security, nothing paid to the federal government counts as payroll. But we do get to add in a handful of extra things that count towards payroll. Let me read those off to you. So the payroll basically is the wages, those payroll taxes, group health insurance payments, and similar insurance payments for your employees. So you get a pretty good bump to calculate this, the maximum loan you can be qualified for. So any amount not forgiven from the Paycheck Protection Program is given a 10-year maximum maturity, just in case you do not use all of the funds to pay the payroll, the utilities, the rent, things like that. And the interest rate on that one is similar to the idle loan. It's a 4% maximum. Right now, it's been quoted at a 0.5% to start off with, and we don't know when that's going to jump and how much it'll jump up to. It may jump straight to 4%, or something in the middle. But that's one of those we'll find outs that we talked about earlier. Let's see some questions here. Oh no, I'm sorry, I misread your question. So the PPP, so it does apply to full-time and it does apply to full-time and part-time employees. So you can you count those. You have to maintain at least 75% of your payroll between the date you're given the loan and it's September. June 30th, 2020. So if by then you are down to 80% payroll, then you still qualify for full forgiveness of the loan if everything else applies.
All right, so I think we've got a series of questions that have come in, and I think if you both are okay, I think we can go ahead and start talking a little bit more towards the questions. And right now, I think if we can, I'd like to start talking a little bit about the questions that have come in towards both programs. And then we'll talk about kind of what we can against what applies to both the disaster loan program as well as the Paycheck Protection Program. So a question came in that are there limitations on doing both the EIDL and the PPP?
So it's my understanding you can apply for both loans, which I'm sure you can. And the government's not going to pay you under both programs for the same cause. EIDL is for all working capital, PPP is for payroll. So let's say, for an example, you are approved for the EIDL loan for $200,000 loan, and you apply for the PPP and are approved for a $50,000 loan. The $50,000 would be reduced out of the disaster loan. So now you qualify for $150,000 instead of the $200,000. So they're not going to pay you twice, but you can apply for both. And keep in mind that the EIDL loan is for 6 months worth of total operating expense, while the PPP is for basically 2.5 months worth of payroll. So if you qualify for the EIDL loan, it should be probably larger than the PPP loan.
And so with that, from a forgiveness standpoint, how does the forgiveness work with these two loans if you were to apply for both?
So there is no forgiveness from the disaster loan. That's the reason why it's important to, in my opinion, to apply for both. Because if you have a chance of getting a grant instead of a loan, then you ought to get the grant for your business. So I think it's important to apply for both. And I know several people are indicating that you should not, but I don't know why you shouldn't, because it doesn't cost anything to apply. You turn it down if you get it.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add to that, Jim, is if you are awarded the $10,000 EIDL grant, and you are also awarded the Paycheck Protection Program loan, that EIDL grant money just comes out of what is your forgivable calculation when you get to the end of the Paycheck Protection Program. So it's like you said, it's kind of there's not really a way to lose there unless you reject the money in the first place.
Right. And someone did bring up before that they are two separate loan programs. Please keep that in mind. The only loan program that the SBA does is the disaster loans, and it is a direct loan. Everything else is a guaranteed loan program, and that's what the PPP is. It's a guaranteed loan program that you will receive from banks. And to start with, the certified SBA lenders will probably have the information before other lenders that are there. So they may be a few days or maybe even a week ahead of the other lenders. But eventually, I think all other lenders that want to be on the program probably can, but they have to be certified by the SBA and abide by the same rules. So theoretically, it should cost you the same to go to bank A, B, or C to generate the loan.
Okay, thank you. So Jim, you had mentioned the 10,000 grant for EIDL. If I get that, let's say I apply, I'm denied for a loan, or I get a loan from EIDL, but I also get a $10,000 grant up to that amount. How will that grant affect the Paycheck Protection Program and the application?
I think as Charlie indicated, and I personally hadn't seen the information, but it makes sense. Charlie indicated that it would be deducted from the PPP portion of the grant when you convert that to a grant. Is that correct, Charlie?
Yeah, that's right. The language they use is it's subtracted from the Paycheck Protection Program loan forgivable loan balance. So whatever you end up being forgiven, you would just take $10,000 out of that. And like I said earlier, if you receive money for both programs and you end up with a little more money than you anticipated because you applied for both hoping to get either one, then you could just take the extra money, pay off the Paycheck Protection Program loan down, however much is not forgiven, and go from there.
But let me bring up something that neither one of us really talked about that's extremely important for a lot of small business owners. And that is that the SBA will be forgiving, let me repeat, forgiving 6 months worth of payments for SBA loans. So that is a grant. 6 months of principal and interest payments that you have on SBA loans will be forgiven. Originally, when the information came out, they were going to forbear SBA loans 3 to 6 months, depending if they've been sold off or not. But the new CARES Act says that the SBA will be forgiving those loans, which means that it is a grant. We're having a little bit of difficulty trying to find out how that information is going to take place. And it looks like it will be automatic from the lenders, that instead of drafting your accounts for that amount, it'll probably come out of the federal government's account. But I wouldn't leave it to that. I would contact your SBA lender and say, you heard that the SBA loan I have with you has been suspended for 6 months, and the SBA will pick up those payments. So it's not going to be added onto the back of the loan. SBA will pick it up as a grant.
And so that grant is specific to existing, or is specific to the SBA loans that are existing, as well as any new SBA loans?
So the wordage, and Charlie, you may help me with this, the wordage says new SBA loans, but I don't know if that has to be for an existing business, can be for a new business. So that will be clarified in the very next few days.
Darren, you kind of cut out when you were asking the question. What did you ask, Jim?
Is there forgiveness? Is that 6 month payment and interest forgiveness, is that being paid for by the SBA on existing loans?
Yeah, for existing loans, that's correct. Your other question was it for new loans? And there is something in the documents that says any new loans, but I don't know if it's for new businesses, existing businesses, or what that's for. So that clarification will be coming out in the next few days.
Okay. Scrolling through the other idle questions. Well, let's say I apply for EIDL, I get denied for that. Will that impact my opportunity or my application for the Paycheck Protection Plan?
No, it shouldn't impact it at all. In fact, they expect, and Jim, you may be able to speak to this as well. They expect that there will be people that will be denied the EIDL loan, but will get the grant. And then you could also receive the Paycheck Protection Program. So the receiving or being denied, one won't preclude the other at all. There's no reason.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So we're going to shift now from the SBA EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans. We're going to shift from that now to the payroll protection, the Paycheck Protection Plan. And so we'll talk about the PPP now and move into some questions we're getting there. Charlie, can you speak to a little bit of how a PPP would impact a nonprofit such as a 501c?
Gotcha. And kind of a disclaimer, I have several friends that that work for nonprofits and whatnot. They are not our specialty. So, but the language in the act specifically includes nonprofits. So there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to apply for these funds, and it shouldn't impact any other federally funded programs they have. So I don't, you know, I have a couple of friends that run not-for-profit schools, for example, and you know, we've advised them, go ahead and apply. You have the same expenses that, you know, the rest of us have, and you need to keep your doors open as well. So, you know, the nonprofits out there have the same ability to apply that everyone else does.
Okay. And we've received a couple more questions on calculating my average payroll, my average monthly payroll. You had mentioned, Charlie, that earlier that if I'm, you know, a lot of folks are using the March 31st to March 31st timeline. Is that a requirement? Or let's say that I laid all of my employees off last month, so my March payroll is going to be pretty low. Can I use January 19 to January 20 as an example?
So the language in the bill is a little onerous. We'll stick with businesses that have existed the entire time, but there are different rules for businesses that weren't around at the beginning of last year. You know, new businesses basically, and there are different rules for seasonal businesses. So assuming that the business has been around, you have to use, and the language in the bill again is a little wonky, but it says basically the 12-month period beginning just before the loan is given. So presumably, let's see, if you apply tomorrow and you are and you have payroll tonight, that you would include that payroll through April 2nd, 2020, and not payroll through April 1st, 2019. You know, obviously that's a little too difficult, but it is definitely, the language doesn't say for last year. It's the 12 months up to when the loan is applied for. So yeah, it's kind of strange wordings. Most people are assuming you're going through the month ended.
Yeah, it is confusing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the business has to be in business February the 15th. Does that sound right,
Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah.
For an example, I've got 2 restaurants that started March 2nd. So, you know, they're probably not going to qualify.
No, that's my understanding as well. One of the so Darren, I think one of the other things that you asked is, what if you cut your payroll? The rule is basically that you need to maintain at least 75% of your pre-disaster payroll by or on June 30th of 2020. So the idea is that if you cut these employees, whether you furloughed them or laid them off altogether and replaced them with new people, that you have to get them back up to 75% capacity. More or less, your payroll costs have to be at least 75% of what they were. If they aren't, then you start to lose some of the forgiveness amounts. So if you're not up to 75% and you're $10,000 over that mark, the forgivable amount of the loan goes down by $10,000. Just to kind of give you an example on that. So, you know, it's going to be kind of a stretch, I think, for some people to still use this money and be able to pay the bills and keep their payroll costs as high as the regulation allows, but it's still pretty lenient overall.
Right.
Sure. And so let's say that I've laid my employees off, or I've sent them home. I'm not paying them. They're hourly employees. Is the PPP, does it allow me to pay them even though we aren't allowed to work because we're not an essential, let's say we work outside or we're not an essential business? Is that the design of the PPP, for me to keep my folks paid even though we're not working?
It is. So you can pay them basically whatever wages you want to call it, whether it's paid time off or otherwise. Do keep in mind though, there's other legislation that came out a couple of weeks ago. It feels like forever now, but just a couple of weeks ago, the Family First Coronavirus Recovery Act that allows for a credit for an employer who is paying employees who must stay home because they're sick. They must stay home because their family is sick. They must stay home because the area is under under a governmental request to stay home of some sort. So there are separate credits, and this is outside of this is separate from the CARES Act, and obviously nothing to do with the SBA, but it provides some refundable payroll tax credits for those employers who are paying employees to literally just sit at home. It's up to $5,110 is the maximum per employee. But it provides some amount of paid time off for those employees. That's more or less funded.
And if I read the PPP correctly, that employees that can't work, for example, you could probably reduce their pay to up to 75% and still meet the guidelines.
Yep.
But I think all of these questions that you can tell are very confusing. There's not real good answers. And then you're asking yourself, well, why don't banks have this ready to go? Well, they're the ones that are going to have to put this together. They are the ones who are going to have to certify that this this loan now becomes a grant. So it's going to take time for them to have things in place that they feel comfortable with and making sure that they do it right. Because if they do it wrong, they're on the hook instead of the SBA.
Yep. So folks, we've hit that hour mark. Charlie is able to stick around for an extra 15 minutes, and I hope Jim can too. If everyone wants to stick around, if you've got to go, feel free to hop off. But we'll keep answering questions for another 15 minutes or so as they come in, as we still have a list of questions that we just haven't gotten to yet. As we talk about the PPP, can you explain the forgiveness piece? How is that forgiveness going to be figured out? How is that going to be calculated? And what, you've mentioned your 25%, maintaining 75% employment level. What other factors go into the calculations around forgiveness?
So from a calculation standpoint, and Jim may have a little more insight, may or may not have a little more insight on the practicality, but I think we're all still a little bit in the dark on that. But from a calculation standpoint, the funds that you were given, whatever they happen to be, $100 or 10 million, have to be used to pay rent, mortgage interest, utilities, and payroll costs. If you do not pay those, if on your profit and loss at the end of the calculation period you have not paid as much of those as you received in a grant, then the part that you would want to become a grant, then it becomes just a regular loan that you need to pay back. Really the two big things are adding up: the rent, your mortgage interest, the utilities, and payroll costs. Payroll costs as defined by the same wages plus group health benefits, things like all the things that we talked about to get the loan in the first place. So as long as those things are paid to the degree you receive the loan, and you keep your payroll at 75%, then the entire amount should be forgiven.
Okay, thank you. How about let's say I have 3 different businesses. What and how do I apply per federal ID per business, or am I supposed to apply under one for either of the programs?
You would apply under the three separate tax numbers, but you have to, when you get ready to fill out the paperwork, you have to say that those are associate businesses that the SBA then can tie all of those together, but you can apply on all three businesses to both loan programs, as far as I know. Does that sound right, Charlie?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. They, I know there's some language in the act that addresses that a little bit. You know, maybe some other requirements that are typical of loans, but they more or less, that's my understanding as well, is that you just, as long as you disclose that you own, you know, that you own more than 50% of various businesses, that sort of thing, then you're in the clear.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, let's say that I received a community grant really early on. The community rallied together, were able to provide me a grant, or I was able to get a grant to help cover payroll. How does that affect the PPP if I have a grant that pays for my payroll?
So I'm assuming it would apply the same identical way, in that it would reduce one of those two loan programs by that amount. But I'm not real clear with it, to be honest with you. One of the things that I'm working with community programs is maybe coming up with instead of a grant program, a loan program, like a bridge loan program. And that if it ends up being a bridge loan, and it's stated in the loan when you get it that you have to pay those funds back in case you get federal funding, then you don't count it against either one of the loans. But my guess is, if it's a grant and you can tie it to payroll, it will probably go over on payroll. And some of the programs I've seen are tied to payroll.
Yeah, I think the appropriate calculation would basically say your payroll costs as you're trying to true up to your forgiveness amount. Your payroll costs would just be reduced by however much received, at least, so you can indicate that, you know, I may have spent $50,000 on payroll, but I got this $10,000 grant outside of this program, so my real payroll costs are only $40,000. So, you know, are we still hitting our marks? Are we still spending the money where it's supposed to be spent, even after subtracting out the 10,000? So.
Sure. And you mentioned utilities. What does that cover? Does that cover? Does it list out what utilities are covered, or is it still very general and will be up to interpretation?
Personally, I haven't seen anything.
Yeah.
So it could include internet, it might not include internet, those types of things.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. We just don't know at this point, and I'm sure it'll be clarified as we move forward.
Sure.
Yeah. Because we have at least 6 months between now and when that particular number is going to need to be figured out, so we can start calculating, or, you know, the banks can start calculating the forgivable amounts of the loans. You know, the utilities don't really come into play on the initial calculation. It's only payroll. But you know, I suspect the utilities are going to it's a wild guess of mine, but I suspect it'll include things like internet and telephone, as well as, you know, water and electricity and
right.
fun stuff.
Sure. How about salaries as it relates to the Paycheck Protection Plan? If let's say I make $100,000 or more, there was a mention of that, I think, in something that I read. Can you, and we got a question on it, is there a limit, or what is the limit that excludes 100,000 salaries of 100,000 or more? How do you incorporate that into your calculations and your requests?
When you're calculating the amount that you're going to request to borrow, you were taking salaries, we're taking the state and local payroll taxes, we're taking group health insurance, all those things. You have to exclude any amount that was paid during the 12-month period that you're looking at, over $100,000 to any given employee. If you are seasonal or a new business, you're using a slightly different calculation, obviously different dates. And those dates would you would kind of extrapolate how much payroll would be paid to that person over a 12-month period. But basically, any employee who's making over $100,000, you only get to use the first 100,000 of it when you're applying for the loan in the first place.
So I can still count the 100,000, but anything past it, $100,001 or 1 cent, anything beyond that $100,000 is excluded. You need to just cap your calculations out at 100,000 if it goes above 100,000.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. We had a question come in about we have one question, folks, that I received that it gets into the family medical leave. I'm not sure that our experts are going to be really prepped to talk towards family medical leave and how that impacts. But a question that I have that this brings up is, let's say, so when I calculate my 12 months of payroll and I ask for a loan for from the PPP for up to 2.5 times my amount, what happens if my headcount changes, different situations happen, and I don't spend all of the money, all of the 2.5 times the money I got? Let's say I payroll 100,000 a year. I got 250 in the payroll protection or paycheck protection. What happens if I don't spend all of that, or I don't hit that? Do I have to pay it back? Is it not forgiven? What will happen there?
Any amount not used, basically when you run your profit loss for that period and you do your calculation to find out if you spent enough money on payroll and utilities and rent and mortgage interest. If you don't end up spending enough money, that becomes just a regular loan. I don't have a ton of the details on it. Maybe Jim might, but it's a maximum 10-year maturity, and the maximum interest rate is 4% on those non-forgivable amounts.
So the original information that came out in the bill states that, but I'm told that the interest rate is half of 1% for 2 years. And it brings up another issue. That's the banks may be paying more money for when they borrow money to be able to lend money, so that could create a problem too. But I think right now we'd have to say that the interest is 0.5% for 2 years. But in the bill, it does say they can go to 4% and 10. So
yeah,
more details to follow.
It's 0.5% as of April 2nd, 2020, and it could be 4% by mid-month or something. I haven't seen anything to indicate what sort of timetable they have for that.
All right, folks, and we're on about the 5-minute mark. We have about 5 minutes left. And so as I'm scrolling through our questions that have come in through the 2 different formats, if we can, let's take a pause and step back let's shift, Jim, back to the economic injury disaster loan. And we've had several questions as it relates to mortgages and house payments and those types of things. One of the questions around that is, if I'm a landlord and all of my tenants have stopped paying, or one of my tenants has stopped paying, can I use that funding, the disaster loan funds, to pay that mortgage on the building, or to pay what I owe on that building?
Yeah, so I've seen one of the forms, and it looks like that there is a spot there for landlords to fill out as well. I'm afraid I can't really respond to that. I'm going to say that yes, probably so. Normally the SBA does not lend to speculative projects like shopping centers and those things, but it sure looks like that there's a provision in there for those type of mortgages. But please don't quote me on that.
Okay, thank you. Could I use that funding to pay off existing loans that I have for my business?
No. So those funds are just for you to survive. So if you have a loan and you say, well, this 3.75% interest is better than the 6% I'm paying, I'm going to pay off this loan. It's not designed for that.
Okay.
Let me also say that any questions that you might have for the for the idle loan, there's an email address that you can submit questions. I've submitted 2 a couple of days ago, and I hadn't had answers back, so they probably have had lots of questions. But it's disaster customer service at sba.gov. And if you're sitting at home and you're wanting something to do and you don't mind holding on the phone for 12 hours, there's also an 800 number that you can call, 800-659-2955. And so just to bring up again, one of the reasons why the SBA is just really having a hard time to keep up, this is a only loan program that they have, direct loan program that they have. Typically, whenever there is a disaster somewhere, they hire loan processors to go work that area and work through it. Like I said, this is the entire country, so they don't have very few people on staff, so they've got to hire them, train them, and get things up and rolling. And so to streamline the application process like they have and to get this information out, I know all of us complain about bureaucracy. They've really done, in my opinion, a very good job in getting this information out and as quickly as possible. And, you know, there may be more incentive packages coming down the pipe. There probably will be, but we don't know that for a fact. So we just have to work with the programs that we have and what we know about the programs, and just know that it's kind of a moving target and things may change a little bit as we go.
Great. Great. One last question, Charlie, against the PPP. How many months is the PPP designed to cover for when they calculate the forgiveness?
Make sure that I understand the question. When you get the loan, the idea is that that it's covering your expenses for the next 2.5 months. The overall, if I misunderstood the question, I think the other thing that you were asking would be how long is the loan spread out over, which is a maximum of 10 years if you don't have everything forgiven. But yeah, the idea is that it'll cover your operating costs for the next 2.5 months.
And it may be hard to cover operating costs for 2.5 months. 75% of it has to go to payroll, so that only leaves 25% to pay for everything else, right?
Yeah, your payroll has to remain at 75% of what it was, and it's gonna be tough for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, if you're using a calculation that is based entirely on payroll, and then you're supposed to use that money to pay for 75% of your payroll plus rent plus utilities, and you know, if your business has been shuttered, then might be a little tough without some other help, maybe from your landlord or other grants and whatnot. So. Oh, Darren,
All right, I was muted. Sorry. All right. So can you just clarify that 2.5 months? Will they evaluate forgiveness at that point, or will it be at tax time at the year's end?
My understanding is that it is 2.5 months after the loan is issued. Jim, do you have a date on that?
You know, I've seen something that no, it'd be guesswork. I saw something that I thought that it was maybe 6 months after this went through, but I don't recall, so I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, the payments are definitely deferred for 6 months. And the idea that that your payroll had to be back up to 75% by June 30th was that's what caused the 6-month delay in payments. And so you get time to find out if you were going to have payments at all or not. So I think September 30th is the earliest we're looking at, and then just kind of, I keep saying September, I'm sorry, June 30th is kind of what we're looking for. So that may be from the practical side of all this, how we end up getting
Right.
the 2.5.
Great. Charlie, thank you. And Jim, want to thank you again, Jim Pillans with the Brazos Valley SBDC and Charlie Scroggins with Scroggins CPAs. Folks, I hate we haven't been able to get to every question, but from a time standpoint, we need to wrap it up. I want to let you know, though, that we have scheduled the next 3 or 4 topics for the coming weeks. And so next week, we've got a couple of attorneys that are lined up to sit down with us and talk through business and employment law and what should we be thinking about as we're running into these challenges as it relates to COVID. This is where we'll get into some of the discussion on the family medical leave and the sick time and some of those. And then we'll have a follow-up discussion on the CARES Act around April 9th. As we get more information, as some of these questions of the I don't knows and we're not sures, we're gonna have a follow-up discussion to allow us to just continue that conversation. And so we'll keep going through there. If there's anything that you'd like for us to touch on and talk to in coming events, please enter it now. Just type it into the chat box really quick, and that way that gives me a chance as I'm working with the different presenters that are out there for us to see if we need to rearrange a little bit of what we have coming, as well as just the general commentary. So want to just again say thank you to Charlie, thank you to Jim for being our first volunteers to put themselves out there and answer questions. Again, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce, to Employer Flexible, the SBDC, to helping organize this. So really, really appreciate it. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at COVID@versabp.com. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.